Okay, we are on. Welcome to the regular meeting of Brisbane Planning Commission. Today is Tuesday, August 22nd, 2017, and I call the meeting to order. A roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson,
Present.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Present.
Commissioner Mackin,
I'm here.
Commissioner Manier.
Here. Any changes to the agenda? I will entertain the motion to adopt the agenda.
I make a motion to adopt the agenda of Tuesday, August 22nd.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion carries. It goes to the consent calendar. The items listed here as consent calendar items are considered routine and will be acted upon collectively by one motion adopting the planning department's recommendation unless a member of the public, the commission, or its staff asks us to remove an item to discuss it. Prior to the motion, the chairperson will ask if anyone wishes to remove an item from the consent calendar. Okay, so we go with, there's one item, approval of resolution GPA-2-17, recommending City Council adoption of the draft park site at Brisbane Village Precise Plan as modified in Exhibit A to the resolution. All of you had the chance to review the Exhibit A. Any concerns, any changes, any that was not included?
No, I'm just wondering, I'm thinking most of the people who are here are probably here to talk about the second item. Could we switch them maybe?
No, this is the consent calendar.
Okay.
This was discussed last meeting,
Okay.
so it's part of the consent calendar.
Okay.
Unless someone wants to remove
Unless someone wants to
remove the
speak
agenda.
for. Pardon? You do, okay. I didn't see your slip, so I apologize. Okay, so there is a request to remove the park site plan from the tonight's consent calendar. Commissioners, any?
I don't want to remove it. I would like to move it to the second item instead of the first. Can we do that?
Okay, we have one that says
I think removing it means that we discuss it later.
removing means I guess we have to bring it back in the future.
John?
You can
Excuse
discuss
me.
it this evening. I think
You like us to discuss today because it says remove
Hang
it.
on. Let's talk to staff. This is not a public hearing right
you're-
now.
you can pull it from the consent calendar and move it to discussion. Whether or not you want to discuss it before or after new business is at the discretion of the commission.
Okay, we will do so. Where would you like to?
I would
insert
like to
this?
make a motion that we remove agenda report and attachment A, B, and C from the consent calendar and instead move it to discussion after new business item G.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, oral communication. At this time, anyone in the audience would like to speak before the commission, any items that are not on the agenda? This is, the items on the agenda, you will get the opportunity to talk at that time. I see none. Written communication, we got a whole bunch of written communication, but they are all related to the item G. So we will go through that at that time. So I see none. We move on to the new business, which is public hearing for 36-50 San Bruno Avenue, NCRO-2 district, use permit UP-2-17 slash.
Commissioner Manier,
Yes.
for the record, could I ask how many letters of support for this item of business we received tonight?
We can count right now. Let me finish this before we count this.
All right.
Let me finish we can start the process. So I was up to use permit, design permit, and grading permit to allow for the construction of an approximately 32-foot high, 3-story mixed-use building, including 16 526 to 545 square foot senior housing units on the second and third floors, and approximately 464 square feet of ground floor commercial space and ground floor parking to replace a parking lot on a 9,505 square foot lot. James W. Trotter is the applicant, and Horsepower Holding LLE Owner's APN number is 007-222-020 and 007-222-030. Okay, so before we get, let's just get the staff report first, and then we will go through how many responses we get at that time. So may I have this staff report, please?
Yes, thank you. The applicant proposes to build a new mixed-use building within the NCR02 Neighborhood Commercial Zoning District. That's at 36 to 50 San Bruno Avenue. It's within the first block of San Bruno Avenue and is part of Brisbane's downtown core. The proposed building would be 3 stories and 32 feet 3 inches in height. It contains 16 one-bedroom senior apartments. There would also be limited ground floor retail and 14 parking spaces. The site is currently developed with a surface parking lot that historically served the 23 Club, although that is a separate group of parcels, separate property, and there is not a tie except informal historically. But so that's a separate. Any work to that would be a separate application. As indicated on the agenda, the applications include a use permit, design permit, and grading review. The use permit is to allow for mixed use. The design permit is for construction of a principal structure within this district, and grading review is for the Planning Commission's input prior to city engineer's technical review. And that's for grading permits involving over 50 cubic yards of exported material or 250 cubic yards of total grading. In this case, it's 119 of exported. I'll first describe the site and the design, and then briefly discuss some of the key findings for approval of this proposal. But all of the findings are included in your staff report, and they all must be met to grant the approval. Further details were provided again in the staff report. So first, just to recap on the site description that was provided in the agenda report, the site is on the west side of San Bruno Avenue and north of Mariposa Street. It's on approximately 9,500 square foot lot, developed with a surface parking lot, with a few trees, a couple small storage shed, which is behind a fence, and is largely fenced along the sides and rear of the property. The underlying subdivision parcels would be merged to one prior to building permit issuance, and that's a condition of approval. The rear portion of the site is roughly a panhandle shape and backs onto the vacant 23 Club bar and cafe. The few trees on the site would be removed and replaced as part of the proposal, as well as a couple of trees to remain, if possible, behind the teen center, and one of those you can see in this image here. The existing fences would also be removed and replaced. Note that the teen center on the northern edge of the site is planned for demolition by the city. The site is generally flat, but has a gentle cross slope of approximately 3.5%. City utilities for the development would be provided from the adjacent public right-of-way along San Bruno Avenue. Now, briefly on the project design, the project description. This 3-story building would have 2 small commercial spaces totaling just over 400 square feet and ground floor parking behind, with 2 floors of housing above. All of the residential units are proposed to be age restricted to seniors, 62 years of age or older. 3 of the units would also be income restricted to be for low to very low income households. The units range in size from 526 to 545 square feet, so fairly modest. The project architect describes the design as Art Deco inspired, and he's here tonight, and I believe he'll want to speak further to that when I'm done. There are also building elevations and renderings along with the material samples, which are provided on the desk for the Commission's reference. So the ground floor would be predominantly taken up with parking garage, but it would have retail liners along the frontage. The residential portion would be divided into two building segments, and this is a roof plan, so you're looking at the two building segments above the parking garage with a courtyard in between, and then landscaped areas to the rear. The commercial space is designed to serve as both display windows, but would also serve as small commercial storefront spaces. These spaces would be approximately 5.5 feet and 13.5 feet deep. In the case of the deeper space, it could accommodate a boutique retail establishment as described in the applicant's submittal. But even the smaller of the two spaces could open to the sidewalk via glass sliding doors to serve either as display case or an active retail space at the edge of the sidewalk. The ground floor would also include an accessible bathroom for those spaces as required by the building code, as well as bike racks along the street frontage and a long-term bike storage closet at the rear of the building, enclosed trash and recycling room, and elevator and stairways. The 16 residential units on the second and third floors again would be split between the two building segments, as I mentioned, above the commercial space and parking garage. There would be an open-air courtyard between those two building segments with podium-level plantings on the first residential level and balconies above that. Since the residential areas would have a center courtyard area, the design allows for windows facing onto the building interior as well as the exterior walls of each of the residential units. So they'll have windows on at least two sides. The building's lot coverage is to be approximately 73%. Note that that lot coverage is well below the 90% that's allowed for this district. That leaves 27% of the site open for landscaping and courtyard areas. That is in addition to the building's interior courtyard that I mentioned. And most of that landscaping would be in the rear yard, and this is the architect's illustration of what the rear yard might look like. And plantings would be condition of approval, but it gives you the basic form. So just a quick recap on the description, and then we'll get into development standards and findings. So 3-story mixed use, it's Art Deco inspired, age, income restrictions, you got commercial spaces as a liner, ground floor is essentially balanced with the commercial and the need for other features such as parking and trash recycling and so forth. And then the 16 units above and landscaping. So regarding compliance with the city's development standards for this district, the proposed building would meet the city standards with a concession allowed for the rear setback to be within 10 feet of the rear lot line. And that's proposed to be as close as 1 feet in one spot, given the irregular rear lot line. Under typical city procedures, a variance would be required for that. However, the state density bonus law provides for a concession to city's development standards if requested for projects that have at least 10% of the total units for lower income, or 5% for very low income. And this application meets both of those standards, so it may take advantage of this state provision. Again, the setback for the rear is 1 feet at the closest, and then it ranges to about 19 feet. And I'll go back a couple slides so you can see. So this shows essentially the apex of the rear lot line where it's in close, and then it spreads out to the sides on either side of there. And that far distance is about 19 feet on the far left of the page. So a few other items to note is there are no side or front setback requirements for this property. In this case, the building is set back from the front lot line between 1 and 2 feet, 2.5 feet, given its articulation between the ground and second and third floors. On the sides, the building generally extends to the lot lines. The lot coverage, again, is under the maximum. It's at 6,900 square feet, which is 1,600 square feet less than it would be if it was at the 90%. At 32 feet 3 inches in height, the proposed building would be almost 3 feet below the 35-foot height limit. And then that drops even lower as it gets close to the residential side towards Mariposa Street. Parking meets Brisbane standards for senior housing with 14 spaces on the site total, including 11 spaces for the housing units themselves plus 3 guest spaces. In addition to that minimum requirement, an estimated 3 spaces would also be retained as on-street parking. And as was mentioned in the agenda report, this is by the city parking ordinance. This is 60% of what would be, 67% of what would normally be required for 1-bedroom units, and that's based on it being deed restricted to senior housing only. Excuse me. So again, as I mentioned, it's deed restrictions would be for age, but also for income on 3 of the units. And the applicant has proposed to have the development professionally managed, and a condition of approval is included for a management plan to essentially handle those deed restrictions as well as maintenance issues. As presented in the agenda report, the commission must make a number of findings. There's actually 25 different findings listed in there and discussed. In brief, the applications meet all the required findings for approval of this project. And I won't go through them all, and they're not listed all here, but I kind of highlighted a few. And the proposal is consistent with the general plan. Land use, sub-areas, and housing elements all address new development in this district. And the designation allows for mixed use as reflected in the zoning. And it does not establish a maximum density, but rather leaves that up to the discretion by the Planning Commission on a case-by-case basis. And since the site is on about 1/5 of an acre, the 16 units would yield a density of 73 units per acre. And this is within the density range for several other sites within this immediate neighborhood. There's actually 5 that are at or above this density. And given the small size of the units themselves, it also helps keep that mass of the building in proportion with the neighborhood. The addition of the 16 units will increase housing opportunities in Brisbane's downtown core, consistent with the housing element, and for providing senior housing, which is part of the city's goals expressed through the general plan. It's in close proximity to the other senior housing development that's at the corner of San Francisco and Visitation. And that development includes essentially a multi-use space that is open to the community at large, and so this is within about 300 feet walking distance, and so easy access to those shared facilities. The development would provide for infill housing that would fit well with the character of the neighborhood, and it would not be detrimental to health, safety, comfort, or general welfare of those working or residing in the neighborhood. Regarding the appearance of the building, as I mentioned, the inspiration was from the Art Deco design style, and that was based on feedback received at the Planning Commission over a year ago in a study session. Staff sees the building as having strong, simple architectural lines, which fits well with the context of the neighborhood, which includes both some Art Deco as well as, I guess, Art Modern and some more contemporary design that you see with 1 San Bruno, and also across the street what was approved at 23 San Bruno. So staff included photos of those other buildings in the neighborhood, and I won't go through all those here, but they're included in the staff report. The building would be well articulated with a setback storefront at the ground level, slightly cantilevered above with the upper 2 levels, including bay windows on both the front and the rear of the building. And it makes good use of materials and architectural details to both reinforce that design style and break up the mass and to be engaging from street views. It also uses contrasting materials and colors to help break up the mass of the building and provide interest. The landscaping would fit well with the site in terms of the design concept, and would meet several objectives, activating the front edge of the site to improve and improving the street trees on a couple of those. Provide for screening between the proposed building and the residents behind. Provide for passive recreation in the rear yard area. That'd be for access by both the commercial tenants and the residents. And provide for stormwater treatment and capture. And all this would be subject to the Water Conservation and Landscaping Ordinance. With regards to mitigating potential impacts, well, the two single-family residences, adjacent to the site, they're smaller. The building would not block light or air from these buildings, given its location relative to those and their orientation as well. Regarding the normally required 10-foot rear setback, the application utilizes under state law the irregular shape of the lot line allows for some landscaping there to help screen the two buildings and provide a little bit more buffer there. Also, as an aside, embedded with the development standards, the Commission has the authority to approve commercial space of less than 600 square feet, and that's based on the determination that it's as large as possible given the site, given the size, configuration, and physical constraints of the structure and the site. And as mentioned in the staff report, there's essentially a balancing act here between that commercial space size and the parking and the need to provide those other features that I mentioned. Finally, note on grading. Since the project would result in exported materials over 50 cubic yards, it's subject to your review, but the grading is essentially within the pad area to create a building pad, and given the large size of the building, it triggers that, but there's no outside exposed retaining walls that are proposed. Fairly flat site here. And the technical issues would be part of the city engineer's purview with that grading permit later in the process. And finally, the number of emails and letters have been received, and you have those, and I know the question came up, there's a number that were included in the staff report, but then you have a number of others that have been sent by email, and you should have on the dias there tonight. So in closing, staff recommends conditional approval of the use permit UP 217, design permit DP 117, and the recommendation of the city engineer approval of the grading permit, the adoption of the resolution with the findings and conditions of approval.
Thank you, staff. Commissioners, any questions for the staff?
I'll go last.
You go last, okay? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I guess I will go first. My first question is, what are the parking ratios at the existing senior center?
I did not look up those ratios. It would have been under the old ordinance, which I'd have to double check that to see if it was the same or if that changed with the latest update that occurred a couple years ago to the parking ordinance.
Okay, I'm just generally interested if the parking levels are the same at the existing senior center and if there have been complaints about overflow parking resulting from that facility.
I don't know the answer to that. I didn't look at the last parking ratios for that senior center.
Okay.
We were really just looking at what the current standards are and that they met them here.
Great, so that's my next question is about the current standards. So there's a parking requirement reduction in this plan based on the fact that there's senior housing as provided by the code. So does that mean that the parking in the current plan is completely conforming?
That is correct. So the 14 spaces that are there take into account that 67% calculation. Otherwise, it would have been 16 spaces, 1 per unit, plus 3 guest spaces.
Right, and is it within our purview to ask for additional parking in a conforming situation?
That is really part of the code, and I no, that's not something that.
Okay, that's just my question.
Yeah, you'd have to have some demonstrated reason why the code is not adequate for any requirements.
Right. The illustration of the parking garage showed a parking door, and maybe this might be a question for the applicant. I was just wondering how guests access the parking spaces. We can hold that question for when they're up. On page G118, there's a note about underground utility districts and the fact that the applicant cannot opt out of that, and I'm wondering what is the significance of that clause?
So this is a standard clause that is really part of any new building that. So it's embedded in the ordinance that when somebody builds a new building, they will sign this agreement that they cannot opt out of a utility district if one is actually established.
So that just means they're getting their power from underground lines and.
Right. If the city was to decide to place those underground in the future, this particular project would have a condition of approval to underground their specific lines, but that condition has to do with the larger neighborhood and undergrounding all of them.
Okay. Next isn't a question, a comment on G118 number 6. There's a typo. 0.5% is represented as 0.005%. That should be either 0.005 or 0.5%.
I'm sorry, what page again?
G118 number 6. There's just a typo in the representation of 0.5%.
0.05% instead of 0.005.
And then
Catch. I read that. Didn't see that.
computer nerd.
Yeah, right.
It looks right, but
Yeah, right.
it bugs the engineers.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter
Yes.
really. I think it's clear.
So noted.
It's
I'll
just a
correct
typo.
that. Thanks.
And then finally, G122, item 23 mentions a 72-hour guest parking limit. And I'm wondering who enforces that, since this is a private lot. I'm just wondering how that's arranged.
Yeah, so this came out of the parking ordinance, this condition, and so it would be something that they will need to address in their management plan, how they do that, and at a minimum, it's going to need to be posted. But actual enforcement of that, it's an internal structure, and they'll have their private management groups. So I would envision that they need to be self-regulating on that, and they'll have incentive to do that so that all residents can enjoy those parking spaces and you don't have people camping in them for weeks at a time.
Okay, that's all of my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. I was going to ask some of those questions, and you already took the lead. Next, who wants to go next?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was looking on the plans for the HVAC. Could you tell me where that's located? And is it on rooftop or is it interior?
I asked the applicant, the architect, about that, whether they would be rooftop, and he has indicated that those would be interior, and I don't recall the location, and so when he comes up, he may be able to address that better.
And the windows, it's not clear then whether the windows actually open to the exterior or whether the entire building is serviced by circulating airflow. Because in terms of energy efficiency, the wonderful climb that we have, it seems like anything we can do to eliminate using energy to recirculate stale air would be really helpful here.
Right, and the bedroom windows are by code to be openable, and I'm assuming the others will be as well. That could be a condition of approval, perhaps, that we could add.
Okay. And the street parking listed as 3 spaces, and just a rhetorical comment that's going to be almost non-existent. There's already extremely tight parking there without anything new being built. And it's not just in that block, it's gone up to the second block now and almost up to the third block, extremely tight. So I think that's ambitious at best to assume there's 3 spaces. I've never seen 3 spaces unless it's high noon in the middle of the day.
It means 3 spaces available, not necessarily 3 spaces empty.
That's very true. Then it's accurate. Okay.
That's fine.
And if you
Be
could,
technical.
okay. Is there a reason why we
Engineer
have,
speaking again.
and I don't know if you know this, Ken, or maybe the developer will have to address it, the triangular landscaped area designated as open space, why is that restricted to the tenants? Do we know?
Sorry, what
The-
specifically to the tenant?
The
Let me
back,
go back.
the back triangular
Yeah, back.
corner. Because
So-
there is a door from the garage.
On the page, are you talking about what's on the left side?
Yes, landscaped open space,
yeah.
592 square feet.
So I may have used the wrong word in my staff report. It's not that the tenants are barred from going there, but I think they would be unable to just access it on a routine basis because of the configuration of the lot. You have essentially just 1 foot wide between the building and the lot line where there would be a fence, and that's a pretty narrow gap to get through. There would be a door through just a maintenance door essentially through the back of the garage that a maintenance crew could get to, but this area is not really conducive to sitting and using for passive recreation because of its access issues. So I see it more as just a green space to help provide that landscape buffer, as well as stormwater treatment, essentially capture area. But really, when I looked at what's usable for the tenants, I only looked at what was in that patio area, as well as what's in the courtyard above the garage. So it's not to bar tenants from it. I think practically it's not very accessible to them.
Okay, because and unless that door was locked, it seems like it could actually be a nice little space if someone wants solitude and doesn't want to go to the other large courtyard, that it's a nice little space. And if it's got a lot of vegetation, which it says it's being landscaped, I was just curious why it was designated that way.
Yeah, that could be flexible, I would say, and the applicant may have further thoughts on that when he comes up.
And then the rear courtyard, I read in the back of the packet about the assessment regarding development of the 23 Club, and that this rear courtyard is actually being planned to share with the 23 Club.
So this is a topic that I've gone back and forth with the applicant about a little bit, and I think there's some residual language about sharing that. Originally, that was the plan, that the 23 Club would be an application brought forward at the same time. They decided not to. I think this would be a space that when the 23 Club, when they bring that application forward, that we would look at that on its own merits, and it could potentially be readily opened up, I think, to the 23 Club, but I would hesitate to go there now because we really don't know what the 23 Club will look like in the future. So
Okay. My concerns there are really noise and potential smokers sitting out there and the close proximity. If this is going to be designated as senior housing and there's entertainment at a 23 Club, and if it moves outdoors and there's people sitting out there talking and smoking late into the evening, it's just not a very conducive thing. And I would think the seniors may be less likely to use it if they feel their solitude is being broken. So
right.
That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Did I give you enough time?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay, regarding my questions, I think most of them Commissioner Anderson already addressed that, and what I say about this project is these type of projects are the one we are in need in Brisbane. We do have a dire need to have more affordable and senior housing, and this project provides that. And also, if you look at the size of the units, they are fairly small. That means they can have a lot of units in a very small space. And I think it's very well designed. I really don't have much concern, other than the fact that we need more projects like this in town. And with that, Commissioner Cunningham.
Okay. I like the overall idea as well. I think it's interesting that this has turned from just being a development to a senior development, obviously to reduce the parking requirements. However, that's my only issue, and I've got to tie it back to the 23 Club. I don't know why we're separating this, because at this point, separating the 23 Club from its own parking lot means that there is no parking for the 23 Club moving forward. And when the 23 Club, and I know many residents in Brisbane came down in support of the 23 Club renovation and keeping the dance floor and all those kind of things. I mean, I was at all of those meetings. That raises concerns for me relative to that. So just keep that in mind just for a second, because I'm going to circle back to that in a minute. I do have questions for staff, and then obviously I want to hear from the applicant about, and excuse me, this is my ignorance, what do we put in a 5.5 foot by 13 foot retail space? We may already have them here in Brisbane, I don't know, but I don't know what that looks like, and if it's a cafe or a sandwich shop or whatever that is, there are going to be obviously people coming to those sandwich shops on a regular basis, hopefully to make them successful. So where's the parking for the people coming to buy their lunches? 3 parking spaces outside of the entire structure. does not sound sufficient to me for that. And any business that opens in Brisbane, I personally want to see wildly successful. The second point that I have here is, how do we, from a legal perspective, since this project is no longer just a multi-unit product that's being bought before us, but it is now a senior housing project. I want to know the legal side of that and how we make sure that is enforced or legally put together. I don't understand. I read all the documentation, but it's sometimes these things are like, here's this one and then here's this one, and we've seen it before. You know, how many parking spaces should be attributed to two commercial buildings, or two commercial spaces that are included in this project, but there's no parking attributed to what we could be doing in those spaces. I understand and really appreciate the fact that we need more affordable housing. It's something I'm very passionate about. Senior housing for this project, I think, is a little more convenient than reality, and I'm happy if we are going to deem this senior housing. I am extremely happy. I have a question, and I put it to the city earlier today and did not get a response, and that is the space that this project is going to be built upon. How many spaces, parking spaces, were there in the existing 23 club lot? Do we have that answer?
I've counted it at 15.
So we're losing 15 parking spaces from a business that will at some point reopen with no parking left, off-street parking. Visitation Avenue is a deadlock 24/7 these days, and as Brisbane is now the favorite place for everybody to use as long-term parking when they go on their vacation at SFO, we've got a multiple problem. We've got people who live on Visitation Avenue right now who will tell you, and I'm surprised they're not here, they don't move their cars because when they come back there's nowhere for them to park. So we have a massive parking issue on Visitation and San Bruno Avenue. We're going to take away 15 parking spaces. We're going to add 14, so we're -1, adding 2 commercial buildings, and assuming that the senior people who will go and live in these buildings, and I want to create as much as we can, are not going to have more than one car. So the one thing I do want to bring to everybody's attention, if you go to a website called datausa.io, that actually is something put together by the county that looks at a whole bunch of different things. And one of the things that it looks at is parking in every city. And as much as we'd like to think that seniors don't drive, all of our senior parking spaces in our senior centre right now are full and on the street. They do drive, and they do have one or more cars. And here's the numbers, just so you know. And these are actually 2015 numbers. And since now we've got more multi-generational families living in homes, 3 generations or 4 generations is the case on my street, here's what it looks like. There are less than 5% of homes in Brisbane that have 0 cars. There is 25% or more, 26, 27% that have 1. There is 44% of homes in Brisbane that have 2 or more cars. There is 12% that have 3 or more. There is 8% that have 4 or more. And believe it or not, there's 4% of homes in Brisbane that have 6 or more cars. So to think that we're not going to have more vehicles on the street is fallacy. That's my only concern. I would really love to see a lot more small homes brought into Brisbane. We've got the capacity to do that all through here. I like the idea of this project, but the parking is just not adding up for me. That's a huge concern I have, and I hope you can answer some of those questions.
But Commissioner Cunningham, if I jump in.
Sure.
If you look at that, parking is a big issue here already. And if we're really going to have the adequate parking, I don't think we can march with any project in Brisbane, because I don't think Brisbane streets have the adequate parking to begin with. So no matter what size housing we build, we're going to face this problem. And if you look at it, a lot of effort been going on in California, State of California Assembly as well as Senate. There are a number of bills that are really requiring less and less parking so that we can have more and more houses, affordable or senior housing, and to meet the housing requirements. So I think the parking will be a problem no matter what you do. And in this particular case, this particular project is meeting the senior housing requirements that staff mentioned. So,
Well, how do we answer the 23 Club?
how
Does that
do we-
mean that the 23 Club now does not get developed because there is zero parking? This
that's a
is an
different-
issue.
That's a different project, and
No, it's not.
no, it is, because it may be subdivided. Who knows? And at that time, it will be decided how that's going to be. So at this point, we have to look at what the proposal ahead of us, and if we're going to do if we're going to forecast in the future, there is going to be another project, and we need 200 parkings, then we cannot build. We cannot proceed with any project. So we have to look at the merit of this particular project and say whether it provides the necessary need we have in the town, which is the senior housing. Does it provide the good living environment in this particular project? Did they cover all the landscaping, all the requirements that the city imposed? And to me, it looks like this is a good project. And
If I may, Commissioner Minier?
go ahead.
I had a question related to Commissioner Cunningham's comments, and that is, it appears that this project is mixed use because of some zoning regulations, and like right across the street, there's mixed use in one San Bruno, but it took many, many years for the commercial area there to get even a single occupant, and the commercial area there is still predominantly unoccupied. I'm just wondering what regulations and processes would be standing in our way to rezone this or somehow allow it to be only residential, because it seems like the new residential is only causing a problem for the project, and it seems like we have an excess of...
Actually, that wasn't my. I
Oh,
didn't,
sorry.
No, I didn't bring up that question at
Well,
all.
I apologize for referencing you. I thought of it.
No.
as
It's
a-
the housing. I don't have an issue with, but we've got 2 commercial spaces in front, and my questions were, what would we use them for? Obviously, we want our businesses to be successful if we're going to put 2 small businesses there. And from my recollection, the reason that one San Bruno, is that the thing on the corner? Is that the address?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Does not have anybody in it is because of the trip restrictions that were put on that particular piece of property. So many, many years ago, it's like, oh, you can only have 10 trips per day, park outside of your building. We've had some pretty crazy restrictions on people over the past, and now we're asking. I am only concerned about parking on this project. Is that you're going to put 2 commercial businesses per se in front of a 16-unit building that has only got 3 parking spaces out front. Anyway, I'm asking questions. I'm not condemning anybody, but I'm asking really hard questions. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
So I
think
apologize for putting in implied words in your mouth, but
Yeah.
but my question stands that it's my opinion that since there's not a lot of parking, if we're talking only about the commercial right now, just yes or no, is it possible to eliminate that as a requirement?
So through the chair, a few questions on the floor here. I'll start with Karen's, that those commercial spaces, and the applicant can elaborate on this, but I would picture something so narrow as the 5.5 foot deep space might be something like a flower vendor or something like that, where you can open up those and kind of spill out onto the sidewalk and get people interested and engaged, but you don't have to necessarily walk into the space. And so this is sort of this, you store things inside, and during the daytime you kind of use that sidewalk, and if you need to go out into the public right-of-way portion, you know, it'd be subject to an encroachment permit as well. But I think you have a good sidewalk width to enable that, and we've actually seen a little bit of an example in Starbucks on a very small restaurant where there's virtually no space. Well, there's a small counter to sit at inside. They got an encroachment permit to allow them to have tables outside, and so you see people dining occasionally out there. So maybe something that kind of model. The other space is a little bit deeper, and you get a little bit more flexibility, but you do have those doors that would open to that space. Regarding the restrictions on the seniors, the legal instrument, essentially this is one of the conditions of approval. So before the building permit was issued, we'd get essentially a deed restriction, and that would be subject to the city attorney's approval, that as well as planning department, that it meets the code requirements for those restrictions and carries forward through time, and so they cannot just ignore that. The same kind of instrument for the low-income housing as well. Parking, I don't have an easy answer for you. This, if I did, I'd put it out there. But it is a separate property from the 23 Club, and as I mentioned, we'd look at those two separately. Although they've enjoyed this, many other businesses in town don't necessarily have that, and it is something, if we're going to look at parking for the commercial core, I'd say that would be something that would be another topic to put back to the city council to direct the planning commission to open the door to that and really look at parking again, although we just did it a couple years ago. And then I think that was your questions, and I'll go to Commissioner Anderson's unless I've missed one. Right, yeah, the new storefront. So there is no parking requirement. The zoning ordinance recognizes on-street parking as meeting the requirement. I would envision, I guess, that you have small spaces where it's probably takes a limited amount of time to go through and get what you need and out, hopefully. But it is something that the code recognizes as street parking as meeting the standards for ground floor retail uses.
Let me say this, that I do agree with you that parking is a real problem. And street parking especially is very little in the city of Brisbane. And we wrestled through this number of times, I think, on the parking regulations, and we couldn't come up with any solution that can, address all of the concerns. And my suggestion is that if we really want to look at the parking again, we should request the city council to have another session on that. And as far as the commercial portion of that, I say that let's see what the developer is coming up with. What are his ideas about the business, and based on that we can determine what kind of parking will be needed on that kind of situation, So, but I agree with you, the concerns regarding parking. I think these are real ones.
And through the
very difficult to solve that. so.
Right. And through the chair, going back to Commissioner Anderson's question about zoning potentially this block, I guess, as residential only, that would be zoning text and map amendment to, you know, if similar to parking, I guess, if you wanted to put that idea forward to City Council to send back to you to deliberate on and forward a recommendation, that, you know, that's a possibility, but it would be a zoning text and zoning map amendment, actually general plan amendment as well. So a few different permits that would be involved in that.
If I may, through the chair?
Sure.
I just want to add to the discussion on parking. I agree with Commissioner Cunningham that to not bring this up on almost everything that comes through here is a travesty, because in that block, we have 23 San Bruno, we have 1 San Bruno that's not utilized, but someday maybe. We have, 124 San Bruno. We have a lot of infill housing. We're talking tonight about Parkside, where we were concerned that spillover may come into more of central Brisbane.
Yeah.
So we can no longer afford to just keep adding all this infill housing and say, there's 3 spots on the street. We keep doing this with everything, but they don't exist anymore because the existing housing is taking up all the parking and then some. And I think it's push comes to shove. We can't just keep ignoring this and saying, well, it'll work out somehow. We're in that bubble between public transit, which we've talked about our last couple meetings, and everyone relying on cars. The fact is we're very isolated, even with our existing transit. So I think that is important that it come up every single time.
And
I
not,
agree with that.
not only that, I think in the past several sessions we had on the parking, we discussed about a central parking space where people can park. And at one point, I think the city was interested in doing that, and then it was dropped, and it never came back again, because in city like that, small city where there are streets are so narrow, we do need some kind of a central parking. You know, if you go to say city of San Mateo, they in the downtown they have a whole bunch of parking that's built by the city, but for some reason here we don't seem to go along with that idea. And in our discussion on the parking, we did emphasize that many times, and I don't know what else we can do at this point other than go back to the parking regulations and look at it again.
Well, there's one other item I would
Sure.
add to that. With the increased impact in lower Brisbane, the people on the upper streets are getting it as well.
Right.
They're parking their cars down in central Brisbane because they don't have enough street parking in the upper streets, in addition to the airport parking, which I see all the time, so.
Through the chair, before we get into too much
Gotcha.
on parking, this is a public hearing, so unless there's other questions for staff,
Well,
Might wanna open
these
that.
are all related to this project.
right?
These
Yeah,
are part of. So
I don't want to
give
get
the
too much into
I want to
discussion.
give the opportunities to the commissioners to talk, and I don't want to restrict the time for the
I hear you.
commissioners' conversation on this particular item. So, anything else you have?
I have just one more comment.
One more
before
comment.
we
Okay,
open
go ahead.
public commentary.
Sure.
Overall, I recognize that parking is a problem. I do support reduced parking projects, and whether we support that or not, with California state legislation such as the ADU,
Yeah.
it's going to be forced on us, and I think it's really important in the future to look into a parking permit program or other ways to limit the amount of cars that can park, like, maybe parking permit on San Bruno and upper streets, and time limit on visitation businesses. All that aside, I do think that the fact that the proposed project, which I like very well, is sitting on top of an existing parking lot for an existing business, I do feel it's important that we address the impact of removing that parking lot from the 23 Club. If that would prevent the 23 Club from reopening, I think we need to decide those issues in concert.
Okay.
That's my opinion, and that's all the comment.
Anyone else before I open the public hearing?
Nope.
Okay, at this time we'll go ahead and open the public hearing on 36-50 San Bruno Avenue and CRO-2 district. And this is a use permit application, UP-2-17/design permit DP-1-17 grading review EX-3-17. Okay, what I will do is I will read into the names of the people who have submitted the written comments towards the end. And we'll start with the testimony now from the people who are in the audience that are here. And we'll start with the applicant.
So hopefully this.
Please state your name.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is James Trotter. I am the architect of this project. Thank you, Chairperson, Vice Chairman, and Commissioners for having me here. So I'm just getting this up. Hopefully, okay. I'm just trying to use glasses, so I'm getting used to this here. Hang on. Okay. Okay, I'm terrible at this stuff. Hang on. Slideshow go.
There we go.
Well, basically, guys, I mean, I really appreciate Ken's summary and all the input you've already given us on this project. I mean, there's a lot you've already shared about the project, and I really appreciate the input. So I'm not going to go through the details of the project as much. I think in my role here is trying to give you kind of the design process, the background of the project a little bit for my office and how we've come to this point. This map right here, obviously we've been talking about this whole area. I'm going to try to use my laser pointer here. Let's see if this works. Good, okay. The project, obviously, this had a start of being, it's always been a housing project, mixed use, and at one point it was including the 23 Club together. They're separated now, but from the beginning and even in our description, there's still an intent for 23 Club to be reactivated. Just want to make that clear, even though that's not this project. I don't think there's any consideration that, about it not happening. So I want to make that clear. That's always been a part of the mindset of the development of this mixed-use portion that we're showing now. I think when you show this drawing, I think why I really have come to really appreciate the work and time on this project and really want this to happen is partly because I have been an architect in Brisbane for a long time. I've worked on projects here since 1996. And I've seen this town change, obviously. There's a lot of things that are changing, but at the same time, one of the things that is attractive about Brisbane to me is that it feels like a small town in the middle of a very intense urban area. And that's an enduring quality. It's a kind of a humble, quaint, but really attractive place to live, and I think a lot of people are attracted to that. And this area, when I just show this, what we drew up in the plan, we found ourselves thinking a lot about what would help activate and improve the downtown area along some of the guidelines we were given by the planning department. But we really wanted to see how this corner is really the center to me, really the energy of the town is right in this area, even if at times, hang on, it probably seems like it's not being used enough. For me, actually, I think the park itself, in a lot of ways, is kind of spiritually, emotionally, the place where a lot of activities happen in this town. And I found myself thinking that when we're doing this project, I want to make this area more walkable. And adding mixed-use projects, especially the housing, for senior citizens would add to the walkable population, the people that would not need a car or would not need to use a car very much. So I just want to show some things real quick here. You were asking, Ken was talking a lot about the Art Deco inspiration that we used to guide us in some ideas. When this project was first presented a few months ago, or a while ago, how long ago? It was about almost a year, I think. There was a lot of feedback about the style of not being conducive to something in Brisbane. And we tried to find a style, and some comments were made in that hearing about Art Deco. And so I want to show some pictures here. There's a senior housing, Brisbane Senior Center. And I think I want you to notice that canopy on top. I think of it kind of being a little whimsical, kind of fun. I mean, it's kind of a modern, simple structure, but that is a style. It is something that actually is a little inventive. You got Brisbane Hardware, which will not, is a very important business in Brisbane, and in a way, there's a community there that comes and talks all the time about things in town. Then you have the is it 2 San Bruno or 1 San Bruno, which apparently is, we're talking about already the challenges of the commercial space and trying to make that work. And that's more of a modern structure, to be honest with you, for me is, it's nondescript, it's a modern structure, but doesn't pop out, kind of sits back. And then you have Visitation, which is really I think really the street that really is the part where the business happens, or could happen. Visitation is the main drag for the town. And San Bruno complements it, but really I think Visitation gets the most attention. And it brings back days to when 23 Club was active and the other businesses that were there as well. I just want to point out real quick, this is Art Deco, believe it or not. That business right there, that storefront. And there's some other examples that I don't show here, but Art Deco is probably one of the few styles that you could find in Brisbane downtown, besides kind of the 70s apartment buildings and some of the other older style homes. So Art Deco is a style that actually intentionally was, at the time in the 20s, was kind of a response to modernism. It added to modernism. It gave more streamlined geometric forms that allowed artists to be more creative. So I want to show, as we're going into this project, I want you guys to understand that some of the ideas of the design were, while it's multi-unit housing, the reality of multi-unit housing, when you have a certain density, you can't break up the form too much. There's only so much you can do. So the Art Deco influences really had a lot to do with the railing, the windows, the undulation of the storefront, and also some of the canopies and some things I'll show later. This plan, you probably don't need to look at this very much. Ken talked about this already. The only thing I want to highlight here real quick, I'm going to show some images in a minute, but the commercial, we've been talking about that quite a bit. One of the things that really became an important comment in the discussion that I'm hearing here is, the trade-off. Do you want a commercial space without, designated parking? Is that worthwhile? Well, I actually think you can, since Visitation is, to me, the main business section, I think this can complement other businesses, but I don't think that they're primary businesses, if that makes sense. I see them as kind of like, there was a discussion early on with my client about the idea of making them like maker spaces or community participation spaces where you show artwork or, create something in a little shop and people can sell it there during the weekends or something like a farmer's market. But it would be for food, obviously, it'd be like for something creative. And I think in some ways, the Art Deco influences my thinking about the commercial as well, even though that's just an idea. It's not really a design. But those spaces in front really aren't big enough to be, in my mind, a primary business where people drive to it. I see them as complementary businesses that work with other businesses nearby. Like if they go eating somewhere, they might go to get flowers over here, or they might want to see some art and check out some art that's been presented by the community. And just some examples. I mean, my client, we've been talking about different ideas for it, but I think ultimately these spaces aren't very big spaces. They would not really bring that much traffic unless you have someone on Yelp say it's the most fantastic food in the world, and they drive from all over the Bay Area just for the food, which could happen, but I wouldn't expect that. I think the main purpose of this idea is to make things walkable, to make them really, the residents, including the housing that we're making, senior housing, so it's not require as much parking, is true, but anyone that's living in the urban core, or the downtown core, I should say, would want to go to a place where they walk instead of driving somewhere else for their food or going to buy sundries. They want to have a business nearby to walk to. So in my mind, that helps with the parking issue indirectly, even though obviously that's a hard thing to prove or to make, something written in the code. But here's an example of makerspace. I just want to show something. This is in San Francisco in the Ferry Building. This space, believe it or not, is about the size of half of this right here. That half is about the size of this space. Now, obviously, everything's stored inside during the night, but when you open it up, I mean, I'm not saying that this is necessarily going to happen here in Brisbane at that scale, but that's an example of a makerspace where you have something to sell or some artwork. Maybe someone does pottery, for example. That could be an example of how that works. I'll just go through design briefly, but here you can see the windows. When I talk about Art Deco, Art Deco is considered kind of like a streamlined idea of modernism with flair, basically. And so some of these windows reflect that idea. And then the railing details here, I'll show you more of that. And in our sketches, we really try to find a way to break it up. We have these canopies you see here. We have the canopies coming over the storefronts. And obviously we've added the bike racks and other things here. And we try to mix up the material so it's not just stucco. We actually have some wood board siding for the planter boxes on the edge at the property line. And we just vary it in terms of texture if we can, and including the railing. I'll just go forward. You've already seen this image, but I just think it's a good reminder that this space is meant to be really kind of a complement to the building itself, where everything is open as possible. A lot of the apartment buildings in the area tend to be enclosed. And so we intentionally want to have a courtyard in the middle of the building as well as outside. And this space, since it's not really very buildable, to be honest with you, it really works well as an open space. And it makes the interior of the block a much more interesting place. Briefly about the units, I think there was a question about the HVAC, and I'll answer that here. The units are really very similar. Really, the main idea of the plans and most of the changes have to do with the layout, whether I make it an open kitchen or have an island. But a lot of the ideas in these plans are intentionally, we could vary the units inside if even the square footage doesn't change very much. And that really will depend really on the needs and how we work out the matrix for those that will be fully handicap accessible or not. But the other thing I want to mention on the HVAC, we didn't intend to have a system feeding from outside. We actually intend to have wall-mounted units that actually, there's some units right now that are very good at recycling the air within these smaller units without needing an HVAC system. They've been used quite a bit in some projects that are hotels, but also some housing developments. One is in Marin. We could show you some of the ideas of the units we're talking about. This is just really the exit plan. But I think one of the things I want to mention, there was some other comment about the open space, and I think let me answer that too. Okay. The question about the open space is a very good question, actually. That's one of the things we actually wondered about this space here. This space had kind of worked itself out. Believe it or not, one of the things that was a real challenge for us on this project, the building department, when they had reviewed this, they basically said, in their preliminary review, they had a code issue about getting out of this area to the front. We had to work out a pathway through here that worked to the front. Unfortunately, this really cannot work right now. From the main reason is that actual natural level is about 2 or 3 feet higher than the grade of the garage. So if we were going to do something there, we'd have to dig it out. The slope of this is a little deceiving. It is a gradual slope, but from here to here, this goes up to about 3 or 4 feet above here. So we intentionally were thinking that we'd keep some landscape intact so we didn't have to remove as much dirt. And if we were going to have access in there, we'd have to build a staircase outside or dig down so it goes lower. We kind of liked it the way it is, to be honest with you, because when you look outside that side, even if you can't go inside it, when you're looking out the windows, you have trees, vegetation, you don't have just a fence. And it's higher, so you'll be able to have it's closer to the vegetation when you're looking out. I think that's the main question you guys had. Oh, and while we're on this page, I'll mention something else. In the garage access, you had questions about guests. Most of the housing projects I've been working on, we've always had something set up for an intercom system for access in general in the front area. This is the small lobby where the elevator will be. For the garage, it's a little trickier, but usually my experience has been that always the residents themselves have a way to, they have to set up for the guests to be able to come in. And that has to be worked out, obviously, but it's really dependent on the because you want to have a secure space inside. You don't want anyone just to be able to come in without security of some sort. And these are the elevations. I think this is just repeating everything I've been saying, but I think you can see the courtyard inside here. We don't have many images of the courtyard inside, but it's really, it's wide enough so we get natural light in there and the flow of air coming through. Here's some of the renderings of the street. Brisbane Hardware. Brisbane Hardware is surprisingly tall, actually. I didn't realize how high it was until I started figuring out the height of it being 2 stories with a parapet. That gives you an idea of the scale. This, the slope coming down this way. And in order to have a level garage, we have to basically step down these boutiques a little bit to make it work with the garage level being level. And then you have the view here from Mariposa on the corner. And the other apartment building here. Okay. I think this is the last thing I want to talk about extensively. I was going to leave it to open to questions if you want me up here, or I could sit down either way. These materials here are just kind of references that were part of the concept from the ideas that we let influence our ideas on the project. If you look at some of these things, like this is an example, this Art Deco idea for this housing up here. This is a multi-unit development somewhere. I think it's in LA. But this is a good example of streamlined, modern Art Deco. This is considered Art Deco. So in some ways that idea influenced us. We can't afford to do rounded windows, but you can see the idea in place with the bay windows. And you can see the idea of how it looks from the outside. The windows won't be this tall, by the way. They'll be screened from below a little higher, obviously. But you can see the railing details and some of these ideas. We want to have wrought iron with wood caps on top. And the concrete and these wood sidings are really mostly for the landscape areas, not necessarily in the courtyard themselves. We want to try to, I don't think, on the deck, the podium deck of the concrete, we're going to have a tile surface that will probably keep it from feeling cold. It'll be warmer material. But you get an idea here from the landscape of what the scale and scope is, and these colors right now are what we're working with for the the base and the base of the building. And down here, this is actually the base. But overall, I just want to make it clear that this has become a kind of a labor of love for me as a project. I think over time I kind of wondered where this was going, not because I didn't like the idea of the project at all, but for some of the things you guys are bringing up. I think that Brisbane is a town that really is slow to want change, and I think some change is good, but sometimes too much change is hard, and maybe it's not appropriate. But for a small town like this, I think a housing development like this meets the needs of a lot of people that need housing. And making it a walkable downtown area is part of my answer for thinking of how you eliminate the need for more parking when you add residences that can basically walk to the nearby businesses. I mean, I think it's a hard discussion with the parking. There's no easy answer for it ultimately, but part of it has to do with lifestyle decisions and the willingness to be using your car less and walking more. So anyways, I think that's basically my summary. If you guys have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Any questions for architect? Okay. Jim?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Joel, did you?
Yeah, you go. Before we go to Joel, maybe we can finish the questions with you.
Okay.
If anybody has any
Sure.
questions. Go ahead, Commissioner McCain.
In terms of the 2 commercial spaces, you've talked about a flower stand or crafts as such or artwork,
Yeah.
but you've also mentioned food several times. Are these commercial spaces planned projected to be built with sufficient commercial electrical power and water and sewer in each of those commercial spaces?
That's a very good question. In terms of electrical, I mean, in terms of commercial, the electrical and power and everything, I actually don't think the intention was food, actually. To be honest with you, when I said Yelp, I was just trying to address the idea of traffic from outside the town coming to some small commercial space, mixed-use building, for generating a lot more needs for parking. But my client can talk about that more, because I think the separate development of 23 Club will include food, but that's totally separate. So this space, I guess it could, but I'll be honest with you, in my opinion, the space is a little too small. It makes more sense for kind of a little shop, something that would only require electrical. The plumbing obviously is at the ADA bathroom in the back. So that's what I'm thinking now. I think the discussion about becoming more like a food space, I'll leave that to my client to talk about.
And may I ask you, since you're the architect, on the southernmost elevation, which is the backside of 200 Mariposa, there's a rather large blank grayish colored wall.
Yeah.
Did you give any thought to breaking that space up? Because
Yes, very much so.
but it still appears
Well,
like a big
I'll be honest with you,
blank wall.
that's something I really want to get changed too. We originally didn't have it there.
Right.
It came up because of building code. The building inspector basically said in review it that you have to have an exit that's enclosed.
Okay, but can you add or consider, and I know we're getting into aesthetics, but I have to say it, I would like to see more detail to the front.
Okay.
And I find the other sides of the building very interesting, and I appreciate your tribute to Art Deco, but the southern exposure with that big blank wall looks like
That side, okay.
in the city where you see lovely Victorians and the sides are
Sure.
just nothing.
Sure.
And the same with the front is there's a large expanse of stucco with little tiny windows, and it just seems,
Oh, that part, okay. Yeah,
that's just my
okay,
opinion.
Okay.
Thank you.
sure.
Okay, Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Cunningham, no questions?
No, I will echo that. I don't like small windows anywhere.
Okay,
They're just a cheaper way to do things, and it doesn't look Art Deco at all. So
okay,
I would want to talk about that as well. But
sure.
as I said, my biggest issue is parking, and I'm not happy with it
Yeah, I understand that.
at all.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
And now Joel, you want to come over?
You guys, is there any reason for me to leave this up? I guess not.
Oh, I'm sorry. One more question, if I may.
Go ahead.
I'm assuming if this is a senior structure that the entire building will be ADA accessible?
Well, the public spaces, yes. But the ADA compliance, the full ADA compliance is a different level than what's required for any residence. If you're able, you can move around without aid, basically.
Well, but if
They
this
can
is
be all converted ADA
But
compliant.
if this is a senior complex,
Yes.
I would request that it would be ADA compliant throughout.
Okay. Well, see, what I'm talking about more is about the inside the space of each unit. Like the counters would have to be different. They'd have to be lowered, or be able to adjust if they can't be lowered. And there'd be some cabinets that we have to take out. And some of the design ideas that you have to do with a kitchen.
In and out of bathrooms and things like
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Yes.
I mean, so those kind of things.
Yeah.
If we make them all like that, then
Roll-in showers.
yeah, right.
Toilet doorways to get
Right.
a wheelchair through.
Right.
So if we're talking senior housing, that only makes sense to me.
Yeah, they have to comply with ADA, right?
Well, there's actually two distinctions. I think my understanding has always been there's a distinction between the people in a wheelchair and people not in a wheelchair. Basically, if you're in a wheelchair, it's a little bit, the requirements go kind of up another level in terms of how much space you need inside the unit. So that's why I was saying it like that.
Well, a lot of our seniors in our senior centre have walkers and all kinds of things.
Right.
And as they get older, and if we're trying to get them to age in place, I would think that would make a lot of sense.
Okay, yeah,
Thank you.
sure,
Thank you, Jim.
sure.
Okay, no other questions, then I will call Joel Diaz. Please state your name, even though I did.
Evening, Honorable Planning Commissioners, Joel Diaz. I just want to touch on what the question asked to Jim about ADA. So there is a certain amount of required ADA compliance for the building, and I think he was really talking about people with wheelchairs and accessibility for wheelchairs. But if you look at the plan, you'll see like the hallways and the doorways to the bathrooms are 4 feet wide. There's certain minimum requirements that are required for senior housing, the bars to get in and out of the tubs, and a lot of that stuff. But in terms of supplying units for people that are in wheelchairs, there is also a requirement for that. Not all of the units have to comply with that, but a certain percentage do under the building code under certain circumstances. So they are essentially ADA compliant, and that is part of the code. But I did want to talk about parking and address the parking and kind of give you our view on parking, because that was very much part of the planning process and coming up with this project and developing our ideas. And we, really put a lot of thought into this, and we're thinking of it from a long-term planning level in conjunction with long-term plans for the community. And because one project isn't going to solve the parking problem. And, the problem has to be solved from a community level, citywide level. And the part of the problem of putting the parking burden solely on these different types of projects is it makes them more expensive, and it makes housing a lot more expensive. So the trend right now statewide is to actually reduce parking, to create these lower parking ratios, to lower the cost and development of housing, so that housing gets built, and then to address the parking in another way. And usually the local government is really planning that out. And so, in this instance, there has been a lot of long-term planning already done, and a lot of this has been quantified and is thought out in terms of growth and growth models and how much Brisbane is going to grow over the next decades, and also, relative to our housing element. So we have an idea of what these numbers are. We have an idea what the future parking demand is going to be, and the city starts to plan around that. Some of the solutions are building parking garages. The city is going to fund a parking garage. But it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario, because they're not going to go spend all this money building parking garages when there isn't really a demand for it. And so you kind of need to build the demand first, and then you fund the parking locations. And so some of the goals of the city of Brisbane, the way we see it, is one of the chief goals is to revitalize downtown. Another goal is to obviously alleviate the parking congestion problem, because it's a real problem, and it's quickly growing, and it has to be addressed. And so that's kind of what we were thinking as well. If we do a senior housing project, we're going to help in that regard, because seniors typically drive less. They don't always, but typically when you have lower parking ratios, we're actually inviting people that don't drive to come live there. So some of these people actually will not drive. But also there's another aspect to another dimension where the people that live there will actually walk to patronize local businesses in town. And so instead of people getting in their cars to drive to Main Street to shop, we're going to have 16 people who will be walking to local businesses. And they're senior citizens, so the idea is that they're going to prefer as a lifestyle to actually walk around the community. And so we're going to further help alleviate the parking problem in that regard. But there is an opportunity to build a parking garage on the teen center. The city's been talking about this at some level. Certainly we're flexible. We're more than flexible, and would definitely consider making changes to parking. There was some talk at one point early in the stages with our project about building a parking garage on our site. And the city could fund part of that. We would have significantly more parking. The problem is the building gets a lot taller. And there was a lot of discussion about people didn't really want to have the impact of this large building. We'd get a lot more parking, and the public could use it. But this building starts to change the way it looks. So there was a lot of thought put into that. It is still an option that could be on the table. You know, it's conceivable that we could do other things. The city has plans to build other parking in close proximity. But overall, the city itself has to solve these problems. It can't be solved by this project. It can't be solved by each project, because if the burden is placed on each project, those projects will be discouraged from being built. And that's sort of that catch-22 situation that we're in. We want to revitalize downtown. We want to supply housing. We want to fulfill our housing element. Yet, if we make it too burdensome and too onerous, it just isn't going to happen. So we have to strike a balance. And that's kind of how we came up with this idea about senior housing. Because, you know, the typical model is to build luxury townhomes. That's the most profitable thing. And, you know, we could still revert back to that. But we were trying to align our goals with that of the community and sort of this new future planning strategy, which is a strategy that sort of revolves around higher densities, smaller units, lower parking ratios. And it sounds, you know, crazy, but this is what people are doing. And I'm sure you guys have heard about it with regard to a lot of the discussions at the Baylands. There was a public speaker forum where they were discussing this in great detail at the City Council. There's new legislation coming down right now. I think maybe you've heard about SB 35, where the state is actually going to completely do away with all parking minimums altogether if cities don't fulfill their housing element. So in other words, if cities don't actually build the required housing in their housing elements, the state is going to allow developers to come in, develop these projects without public hearing, without environmental review, and without minimum parking standards. And that's how severe the housing crisis has become. So it's at sort of a crossroads and a precipice, if you will. And that's something that we're very aware of and we respect, and that's how we came up with this design. The reduction in parking, yet the increase in units, helps justify the project financially for us, makes it more feasible. Like I was saying initially, you know, luxury townhomes or at a minimum regular market rate apartments are a deal that pencils out much better, if you will. But this one with the senior housing, it was really close, and we feel like it is going to work. It's something we want to do. With regard to the 23 Club, initially we were going to look at it all together, and we can't talk about it too much, but there is basically what's happening is there's a tenant that we're considering for the 23 Club. They have unique needs. There's a very high probability that tenant will not be these two projects won't be intertwined at all. And I can't go into it too much more. But you know, just know that we're working with the community, that this tenant that we're considering will actually be, if they relocate, will have a beneficial parking impact on the entire community. This is, I can't explain it too much more than that, but if they relocate, there will suddenly be many more parking spaces available. And just to sort of echo what I'm saying, if you look in the staff report and you look at the environmental peer review that was prepared by the consultant, LSA, they talk about the cumulative impact of our project and parking. And they discuss that the overall impact is beneficial to the community. And it's because of these reasons, the reasons that I just put forth. And because this is the trend. This is the way things are going. And it's probably one of the best scenarios that I think we could have come up with. It strikes a really good balance. It certainly doesn't solve the parking situation by any means. It has to be addressed in the future. It's something that the city has to do. The city is going to need to build parking structures. The long-term plan, what they're saying now is all these planning geniuses are that these parking structures will eventually one day be converted to housing. And the shift is going to be out of cars completely. There's going to be autonomous cars driving people around is what they're saying. And these parking garages will eventually become housing. So there is a lot of thought behind the scene. And it's sort of a leap of faith. It's a bit of trust. But, you know, the overall goal is to revitalize downtown, to help out people in need, to provide more housing in a critical time, to provide affordable housing. And so that's kind of my take on housing. And, you know, we are trying to meet the standard. Certainly we are flexible. We could try to change it and meet some other standard, you know, but that's kind of what we've been told, is that these are the standards. This is what you need to do, you know, figure something out. And this is what we figured out. So thank you. And if you have any
Questions for Mr. Diaz?
Yeah, I do. So previously, when you brought this for review, you mentioned that, you know, the 23 Club project and this project were combined, and it seems like the senior housing part, while different than the current proposal, was fairly similar. And I believe there's a little more parking in the previous plan, but it was fairly similar. I was wondering if you could just speak to that plan about the conformance of the 23 Club in terms of the parking requirements for the business under the, I know it's no longer a current plan, but.
So are you saying there was more parking for the business itself in the initial plan?
Well, the plan that contained both the 23 Club and this had more parking, if I remember, but that's the combined plan, so I'm just.
Yeah, and so the parking wasn't for the business. And conceivably, there can be more parking here. But with some of these additions, like the bathroom, the trash enclosure, the bike storage area, the larger commercial spaces, we lost some parking. We can still kind of maybe squeeze in a little bit more. We were hoping to reserve some of that parking for the future in case we do dovetail this with the 23 Club in the future, which we just have no way of knowing if that's actually going to happen. We could potentially get some other units or dedicate other spaces to this project if that doesn't happen. That's kind of why it looked the way it did initially, but a lot of that has evaporated because of these new physical rooms that were put in the parking garage. They took away parking spaces.
Right, but one of your comments was exactly to my point. You said that in the other plan, the parking under the senior housing wasn't for the business, and I was wondering if you could speak to, like, you know, how many spaces were left for the 23 Club, like there, all visitation street parking.
I believe there were 3 spaces more that were for additional senior units that we were going to.
No, I'm talking about for the business.
There were no actual dedicated spaces for the business because there are no required parking spaces for retail. And part of our thinking was that because typically the 23 Club doesn't have a huge crowd. They do, like, if they have a giant show, like a rockabilly show or something, but typically during the week, not very many people. And most of those people tended to park on the street, not in the parking lot. In fact, a lot of times the parking lot was actually roped off, so you couldn't park there. And so what we thought was, hey, let's make the 23 Club smaller. Let's make it more manageable. Let's lower their overhead so that they can sustain their business with that small crowd of people, having, you know, a dozen people or less coming in every night. And we were going to update the stage so that maybe we could have poetry night. You know, we're talking about small crowds sustaining this business. And because the problem with the 23 Club before, and why so many people were in there and closed their doors, was the overhead was too high with this really large space in conjunction, you know, the bar with the restaurant, the outdated utilities. The utility bill was $5,000 a month. Their total overhead was $10,000 a month, and just impossible for them to sustain that with the small amount of people. So we kind of worked backwards from that and started mapping backwards, and we have an idea of what they actually grossed a month, and it was $10,000 or less is what they actually grossed. So they were either breaking even or losing money. So then we started mapping backwards and saying, what can we build and how can we reshape the 23 Club so that somebody could actually survive there? And so that's how we kind of came up with that configuration. We don't anticipate a ton of people being there. I do think that there will definitely be an impact from parking impact from the club. I don't think it's going to be any more severe than it ever was. The weekends will be its own thing if those events happen. But in general, you know, we're hoping that a lot of the community will walk down there and patronize it, that we're not going to have a big crowd coming from a draw from outside of Brisbane parking there. I'm sure certainly some people will, but we're hoping there'll be more foot traffic kind of thing.
That's all I have.
Any questions, Joel Diaz?
Yeah, Joel, I remember you saying to a huge local crowd here that the 23 Club would be revamped and it would become this great place that it used to be, and that we would all be down there. And I know a lot of people in town are asking for somewhere to go and have a drink and a chat and a hangout with their neighbors. And there were some old-time Brisbane people who you promised at a couple of these meetings that the dance floor would stay. That's why we're okay with, cutting off the back of the building, and that seems to have all gone away now. So I think I really need to think about this, because I think the two, whether you've separated them as two separate projects, but from an overall impact perspective in Brisbane, I want to think about this, and you've brought up some new things now, saying there could be these other businesses in there, and not even the 23 Club, and
Yeah, that's
I haven't
actually
had enough time to digest the fact that I'm looking at this going, one of the things I'm really strong on is affordable housing, and reframing that whole conversation. And Colleen and I are very passionate about electric shuttles and all of this kind of stuff, and it's not pie in the sky, it's an absolute reality. It's going to happen, and maybe it's going to happen for all of our seniors as well. But I'm kind of up in the air, very confused right now.
Well, yeah, I'd love to help clear up the confusion then. This is not part of the project before you, but I'll go ahead and talk about it some more. So essentially it will be identical to what we proposed the first time. Even with this new tenant, the only thing that will not be a part of it is the additional residential units. So the fire pit, the outdoor seating area, the new stage, all that stuff is identical. And it's not part of this project. Really don't want to go into it very much more than that, but the promise, so to speak, is still in place. It's still what we're going to do. We do want the community to come down and hang out. It is a place meant to be for the community, for foot traffic. It's the kind of thing that I think on Friday nights we could probably go down there, and sit in the outdoor seating area. We intended to have a co-op kitchen. We still do. The co-op kitchen concept was to be rented by other people to help lower the overhead cost of the bar owner. So somebody might just do breakfast, another person might just do Friday dinners. But in terms of combining it with this project, that's not going to happen anymore, is what it looks like. And they're going to be standalone projects, but it will be preserved. That's the intent. It will be identical without the residential units right now. Now, if there was a way that we would prefer to bring the residential back into it, if we can. We would like to preserve some parking somewhere else if we can. But if we can't do that, it's not in the cards. It's not meant to happen. We can't do that. But right now, financially, it's something that we can do. It's something that we think will be good for everybody. And fiscally speaking, the feasibility of this, preserving the 23 Club, revitalizing visitation, is highly dependent upon our project here and us being able to do it. And that's kind of how we're looking at it. And again, it's a standalone project. It's not tied to that one anymore. Initially, it was a year ago, the way that we had proposed it. We are no longer proposing it that way. We do have plans, as I said, to move forward on that, but we do not intend to combine the two, and at this point will not combine the two. That's not going to happen. So, and I can't get into any more of the details on that, except that it's just confidential at this point. It's just business. And I probably said more than I should have, but I just want to answer your question.
Any other questions? No? Okay, we'll take 5 minutes break, and we'll start the public testimony after that. Okay. Okay,
Just wants to be bossy.
want to be bossy, okay. Okay, we are back in session. We'll start the public testimony now. I had 2 slips here. Anybody else want to speak about this project? Can you fill this out? Staff has the slips. Go to the staff there. Thank you. Okay, we will start with number 1. That's Paul Buscal, 532 Alvarado Street.
Honorable Councilman, Commissioners, thank you. So, months ago when they proposed this project, I was in favor of it. For the simple fact is that there's a real need in Brisbane for senior housing. I know there's like 100 seniors waiting for the housing we do have available on the list. You're right to say that parking's an issue, and the fact that there will be a future commercial use on the adjoining property. So, you know, I know the city in the past has sold public property, city property, to the bakery. It was a rail spur that was sold and used just for parking for their building. So the teen center is slated to be demolished, and I know they don't have any plans, immediate plans, to do any development there. And could it be possible, like they have the density transfer for purchase of acres, of Brisbane acres, that the city would be willing to sell the teen center property for parking, and not a parking garage to satisfy the downtown needs, but to satisfy the needs of the projects in particular? You know, the density transfer was for higher density for construction on lower acres, but, you know, the city's been selling public property. I know they also lease public property. Part of the rails to trails properties is being leased for something that's non-structural on it, you know, a non, you know, low impact use. You know, it's really important to have a development like this available in Brisbane. And, you know, the Parkside plan wasn't offering anything on this magnitude for low income and lower income applicants. That's why when I first heard about the project, I thought that this would really, you know, not only satisfy, but could make a nice complement to the neighborhood. You know, it's possible that I know when they talked about doing the commercial downstairs was to have something that was vibrant on that part of San Bruno Avenue to enhance the area. You know, what if the commercial wasn't done downstairs? And I know that was one of the city's concerns as far as the planning department, the loss of the parking spaces by putting in the commercial area. So I support the development. I really do think that the teen center property could have a better, serve the community better for parking for that area, especially for the 23 Club. I mean, the 23 Club's an established historical part of Brisbane. And, you know, we should be able to provide parking for the area. And the fact that they're eliminating the parking in the back doesn't mean that they're not entitled to have parking elsewhere. So I would hope that the city would consider selling the teen center, possibly doing a trade for acres, Brisbane acres, that could serve this community. So I was just trying to be creative when I heard that parking was really going to be an issue. And even back when they first proposed it, parking was an issue. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next one in the line is Hvac, and is from 353 Alvarado Street.
Hello, Commissioners. Thank you very much for having me here. Hvac, resident of Brisbane. I'd like to thank the developer for proposing a project in line with the city's needs. I think, just echoing some of the earlier comments, we don't need luxury townhomes. We can go one exit north on 101 to Candlestick Point for luxury townhomes. We can go one exit south to Grand Avenue for luxury townhomes. We don't need them here. What we do need is low-income housing, and for seniors especially, it's definitely an underserved community within our city, and so that's why I see this project as being vitally important for the redevelopment of downtown and to provide a multi-generational community for not only the seniors who live here now, but also for the families who live here, such as my own, that have an aging family member that they want to have close to them so that they can provide support and care. So with that, I just ask that you consider this project and approve it. And one other comment that I hadn't really thought about with regards to the parking, and that is with regards to SB 32, which is California's new strengthening of AB 32. AB 32 required that we cut our greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. SB 32, which was just passed in 2016, requires that by 2030 we go 40% lower than 1990 levels. And with the electrification or the decarbonization of our electrical system well underway, the only thing left that we're going to be able to decarbonize is our transportation system. And so the talk about parking and the talk about cars, in a lot of ways, is last decade's problem. It's not the next decade's problem. And the next decade's problem is going to be how do we build sustainable communities that are linked to transit and have accessibility and walkability built into them. And I believe that this project fills that void. And so, I would just consider what we're going to be looking at as a state, as a country, and a world in decarbonizing our transportation systems. This is where we got to go, and parking spaces hopefully are going to be redundant because these problems will be solved elsewhere. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hvac. And next is Sophia Osimando. Osimand.
Hi.
You're from 232 Mariposa.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the parking too. Like you said, there's nowhere to park. I mean, people come at night and they're just driving up and down and all over, and there's nowhere to park. And people double park their cars, and they wash their cars in the middle of the street because there's nowhere to park from the apartment houses, because there's nowhere to park. And what's ironic, my friend said I shouldn't talk about this, but where they want to build, there's two older people that live there. One's 97 and one's 94. The one lives in the adjacent house. What's ironic is she owned that lot they're going to build in. That was her mother's lot, and they sold it for nothing almost. And she's going to have to endure that noise if it happens. And she's 97 years old, and her kids wanted to put her in a home just so she don't have to endure that. It's just cruel. I mean, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. That's the oldest part of Brisbane, that area there, because that's where Brisbane started being built. And you got old people, and you have to care for your old people too. You just can't be that cruel and subject them to that. I don't understand.
Okay.
I'm nervous. I don't know. And I'm just worried about all the old people because they have to endure that. And they're really old, and they can't take that pounding and hammering and drilling and stuff. And just,
Okay.
You got to care for the old people too. Those are your old people. Those are the oldest people in Brisbane. They lived here forever. One was born in the apartment house across the street. The other one lived there, her mother, from the 30s.
Wow.
And you're going to subject them to this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next one is Denise Gregory, 99 San Bruno Avenue.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. 99 San Bruno Avenue is directly across the street from this nice-looking designed building that we saw tonight. However, this building, 3 stories high, will directly block my view of San Bruno Mountain. It'll block the sunlight from my house, sunlight from my garden, sunlight from my porch. I'm not opposed to anything being built there. I'd like to see a single level senior housing unit, not a triple can't talk, I'm nervous. I live right next door to 35 San Bruno Avenue. That's a 3-story apartment building. There are multiple families in single units there, tons of cars. I see the streets packed all the time, lots of traffic all the time. Aside from the project blocking my view of the mountain, blocking my sunlight, my heat, my garden, parking's already a problem. There's also a lot of litter in the street around there. The senior units, while they seem small, I can tell you they can easily house 2 seniors in each of those units. I lived in a 300 square foot place. 2 people could live in a 300 square foot place, and so in these 500 plus square feet places, 2 seniors could easily fit there. And that would be double cars. Yeah, we're talking about parking, what we want to see in the future and the trends, but the trends haven't happened yet, so we don't need to talk about the trends now. It's time to address what's happening right now, and right now it's a car-heavy place, and that needs to be thought about. And they say the one project won't solve the parking, but I say one project can make the parking way worse. So we don't expect a solution, but we don't expect it to get worse either. And that's a concern. So I think deal with the car diminishing in the neighborhood when people start to shift out of cars. That's not happening right now. So please consider that this is too big of a project in this area, and it should be a smaller project and a single-story project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise. Okay. Next one is Dave Bordstrom, 301 Harold. Is it a street or road? Road, Harold Road. Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'd like to speak in favor of the project. Anyway, I was just curious. The previous person said that it blocked her view and blocked her sunlight, and I'm just curious what your address is.
Irene Oliver's old house, 99 San Bruno Avenue. It's on the corner of Mariposa and San Bruno Avenue.
Okay, well,
So can you repeat that so the people at home can hear it?
It's not a discussion.
No, but 99.
Anyway, okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, 99. But anyway, the project seems to be designed in such a way that this would be kind of north and west of the house that she was talking about, and it would seem that the sun comes from the south and travels to the west. But I don't think this project would be or hamper the view and the sunshine for that particular house. Also, this senior housing is really needed in this town, and anyway, anyway, we'll all be seniors one of these days, and maybe we'll need to live there. But
some of us are already.
That's true. Yeah. And anyway, regarding parking, that's definitely a problem for sure. But I think the city, it's not going to be solved immediately, but I think the city should probably address that and maybe put it in a parking lot like the other person said. Maybe use the teen center or another portion of land to alleviate some of that parking. A lot of towns do that, such as you said, San Mateo does that. Millbrae has several lots. Anyway, but that's, and they're public lots. So anyway, I just wanted to say I'm in favor of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Barbara Ebel, and the address is San Bruno.
Yeah.
The entire San Bruno Street, I guess.
Yeah, I belong to the entire San Bruno Avenue, and it all belongs to me. Just kidding. So I'm in favor of the project. I think that the proposal really tried to incorporate the feedback and the needs of the community. Would that the other projects before the city of Brisbane were so sensitive to the needs of the community. I know parking's a problem. I think we're going to have to confront that parking permit situation fairly soon. I mean, especially with people coming out of town here and it being all over the internet that this is a good place to dump your vehicle when you go to the airport. So yeah, parking permits, we've got to address that, especially because there's going to be more and more projects like this coming forward. The one thing I wanted to say about the project is I think it would be really neat if the proposal would consider inclusion of a NEV, neighborhood electrical vehicle. They do like 30, 40 miles per hour. They have a limited range, but I think it would be really helpful for the seniors to get around, you know, they could probably get to like Trader Joe's or more neighborhood things. They don't go super fast. They could share it, you know, they're simple to drive. And that way, you know, anybody who didn't want to have their own car would have a vehicle there on site that they could use. And I don't know, since they've got a management company they want to have, I'm sure they could all work that out somehow. I don't want to get into their business too much, but I think the addition of a NEV would be really useful to the project. And I think that's all I really wanted to say. I think they've done a really good job of trying to incorporate the community's needs and dealing with the parking space issue as good as well they can within the limits of the lot. And I think I'm missing something, but I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Last chance. Okay. Okay, Bonnie. Your name and address first.
Bonnie Boswell, 7 San Diego Court, Brisbane. Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I think you should approve this. We have over 100 people on the waiting list. The more I've talked to people about this, they say, oh, my mom's on the waiting list. Oh, I know so many people on the waiting list. It's close to 100 or over 100. This will help revitalize downtown, and this is an amazing location for seniors to be living in Brisbane. Walking distance to the library, community center, stores, restaurants, senior citizen center. It's just an amazing location, and this might be the best opportunity we have for our seniors in downtown Brisbane. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hvac, please.
One more comment I omitted in my prior plea for approval, and that is simply that the developer might consider installing solar, since we have a flat roof, that we could drive some sort of renewable energy out of that space and further increase the sustainability of the development. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, gentleman in the back. State your name and address.
My name's Albert Alaman, and I live at 232 Mariposa Street, and the parking is really bad around there. You know, all you gotta do is go over there at about 7 in the morning or 11 at night, and you can't find any parking space anywhere. That's during the daytime. People go to work, and there's plenty of available parking. But this is not real affordable housing they're building here. Senior Garden Apartments is affordable housing. It was constructed by Habitat for Humanity, so the rents.
Can you come a little closer to the mic, please? Thank you.
Yeah, the Habitat for Humanity constructed the senior center, senior garden apartments. Those are affordable apartments. This project is not going to be affordable. This market-priced housing is not going to be affordable unless you get somebody in there to share it with you, which is what happens with all the apartments in that vicinity. You have a 13-unit building on San Bruno and Mariposa with no off-street parking. There's one off-street parking space for that building. It's an old apartment building. And then the people who live in the other apartment buildings nearby, they bring in roommates so they can afford the rent. So there's just terrible parking situation there. And then this is just going to add to it because people will have to bring in roommates to share to pay for the rent. I would prefer that they want to build townhouses there. I would prefer they build townhouses there rather than senior housing because it's not going to be affordable no matter what they do. Unless Habitat for Humanity constructs it, because they can do it. They can keep the price affordable because they're a non-profit. This is just not going to be affordable housing. If it was affordable housing, then I would support it, but it isn't affordable housing. It's going to be market price housing.
Thank you. Okay, Denise, one more chance.
Thank you. You have a good memory. Denise Gregory, 99 San Bruno Avenue. While the idea of commercial spaces is nice, the people that will be employed in those commercial spaces will need a place to park. That will add to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Joel.
Good evening, Joel Diaz again. Just wanted to mention that, there is going to be solar generation. We are going to have solar panels. We're going to try and do as much as we can and do as much electrical as we can. If you guys pass it tonight and the city council passes it tonight, I would love to put in the type of electric car that Barb's talking about. That was one of my ideas originally, and we talked to the police about it, and they said we could do that. And so I would love to do that. The other thing is, I understand there were a great deal of letters in support, and I think the chair, you were going to read them out and tell everybody how many there were.
Yeah,
Just like you to ask and tell us what the numbers were, if it was.
What I'll do is I will read the names of that and say whether it's in favor or not, and so I'll go through the whole list rather than.
Oh, you don't know how the actual number? If it was
I believe they're about 30.
I can count it.
I counted 16.
Okay.
16 total.
16 total.
That's 4 and.
Oh, I thought there was more like 30 or something. There was a bunch of emails too, wasn't there?
This is counting them all.
Printed. I only
And
got a few
some of them look like they were written by the same person and then just signed by a bunch of
Doesn't
different
look like 30. It's about 15 or 16, I think.
More than I've ever seen, anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else before I close the public hearing?
Would it be appropriate to ask the applicant for comments on affordability?
Sure. Come on, Joel.
Thanks. Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. I forgot to mention that. Yes. So there are going to be 3 affordable units. So it is going to be affordable housing. And this is a method to build affordable housing. One's very low and the other 2 are low income. All 3 will be rented below $1,000. I think the very low is like $500 or $600 a month, and the low income I think are $700 a month. So you're going to be helping some people, 3 people. You're definitely going to be helping some senior citizens who have to compete with other people to find a home. And you are going to build a senior community in town. And that's kind of one of my goals, is to help build a better, bigger senior program. They call it the silver tsunami. Senior citizens are going to triple in population by the year 2035. And this again is part of our alignment of goals with the community, and one of the reasons why we wanted to do this.
I thought we are already there. We don't have to wait 2035.
Do you have projections for?
Hey, Greg, I can't hear you.
Do you have projections for expected rents for the other units that you can share, or?
It's going to be dependent on the market, but they'll probably be, 1 bedroom right now is anywhere from $1,500 to maybe $2,000 on the high end, but they're a little bit smaller, and they're only going to be sought after by seniors, so probably on the lower end, closer to $1,500, $1,800. Your guess is probably as good as mine. We don't have that product in town.
Right.
You know, if it was a regular apartment, I could tell you like on the nose what it would be. But
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Any other questions before we, okay, Barbara, last chance.
I had remembered my other point, and I know you guys have heard this before, but there's a lot of seniors who could potentially move out of their home, except they don't want to move out of this community. And giving them a place to go where they can maybe leave a large house has a domino effect and then opens up those houses to new families. And I think we probably have more potential in that area of housing than we do in new construction. So I think giving seniors a place to go without them having to leave the community and go out to, you know, had a grandma in like, Healdsburg or something like that, you know, is really valuable to this community. And in terms of not just the seniors, but the young people as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last, okay, I can entertain the motion to close the public hearing.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, or Commissioner Anderson mentioned earlier, that we have about 16 correspondents that are in favor of this project, and there are only, I guess 3 or 4 of them tonight.
Through the chair, you also have some, if you're not counting the ones, you also have some 8 more in the back of your agenda report.
So that's about 16 plus 8 is 24. And I think among the 24, there was one that had a parking concern, but the others were all seems like in favor of the project. And also tonight, some of the audiences they were not in favor of the project. So with that, the staff, can you put this in the record? All these the people who have submitted the Okay, so now deliberation, commissioners. It's your time now. What you want to say about this project?
I have a couple questions for staff, if I may.
Yes, certainly. This is the time to ask any questions you have.
I was wondering if there's any information available about any of preliminary ideas for parking at the teen center that was mentioned. Is this just so conceptually of nothing to say, or do you have any information?
There are currently no specific plans that the city council has for the teen center, so that would be something certainly they could entertain as time goes on, and I know they'd be actively looking to do something with that space, but nothing currently.
Okay, and my other question is related to the commercial space at 1 San Bruno. There's a comment that was not very rentable because of parking restrictions or trip restrictions, and would that be adjustable if the city put in a parking lot, or would those restrictions stay in place?
So there is one of the commissioners, I think, mentioned a condition of approval that restricts the number of trips to that commercial space per day. And that has been a concern by people who have been looking to occupy that space is, well, I have a business and my intent is to grow, and it's at odds with that condition. And essentially what they would have to do is come back to the Planning Commission to lift that condition from their use permit. So just the presence of more parking somewhere else would not relieve them of that requirement. So I in my opinion, that has been an impediment. We do have the back space occupied now, and they hit at a bad time in the market, as you all know, with our recession. But presumably, eventually that's going to be occupied. It's a larger space too, and so it could be subdivided into 3 different commercial space by the application. That's what it allows for. But there's a cost to doing that as well.
Yeah, and my question wasn't so much whether it would just automatically be dissolved, but whether it would be feasible for them to petition and have it removed if there was more parking as might be provided in the teen center.
Right, so that would be a use permit that would come back, essentially revising the use permit that the Planning Commission previously approved.
Okay, thank you.
That must have been a long time ago, because I was part of that.
Somewhere, I believe around 2005 was when that went to the commission.
Okay, any other questions for the staff and suggestions as to how we proceed with this project?
I have relative to the teen center. So if there's an idea floated to put parking at the teen center, was that idea to have a single level parking structure, or are we talking potentially a multi-level parking structure in a residential area?
Again, since staff's not aware of any specific conversations regarding that idea, I'm not sure what might have been considered.
Because from just my knee-jerk reaction to that thought process is, are you kidding me? We would put a multi-level parking structure behind somebody's home. I sure wouldn't be okay with it. But we have talked about multi-level parking structures to alleviate some of the parking, and if we had electric shuttles going from those multi-level parking structures, and my first place, and I've mentioned it many times, is underneath the bridge. And if we have electric shuttles going round and round and around, that's not going to offend anybody. But I just cannot imagine anybody in this room agreeing to a multi-level parking structure behind their home.
Okay, go. Anything else you want to?
Just taking a look at, in the packet, the street level view of all the buildings along there. If you look at the teen center, and if the existing parking lot, Ken, did you say was 15 spaces roughly where the project is located?
That's my count of striped spaces, yes.
Teen center would be at best maybe 7. So I think it just provides you with a better conceptual idea of whether that's even doable.
Okay, so anything else before we decide what to do with this permit? The hearing, we closed the public hearing. So if I will allow you to come to the podium and don't speak from there, but here, so people can hear you.
It's a very quick comment. Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson, for allowing me to just interject quickly. But when we looked at the area of the teen center, it's roughly, it's still, I think it is smaller than the site we're on now with the housing. But it's not that much smaller if you go all the way to the back where the open space is, or that fence. So I'm pretty sure you could get, I don't know the exact parking you can do, but the space is definitely close to the size of the lot we're using. It's, I mean, it extends, it's like about 2/3 the side at least. So I think it's more than 7 parking spaces. It would probably be closer to 10 to 15, somewhere between 10 and 15, I'm sure.
Okay.
So that's it.
Thank you. Okay, we're back to deliberation again. Commissioners, what your thoughts on this project? Start with Commissioner Collin.
I've spoken to the aesthetics of it. I wish it wasn't abutting the properties on Mariposa. I think it seems very intrusive to have a 3-story structure in your backyard like that with a big blank gray wall. I'm hoping that the architect has some kindness to address those issues, because the other 3 views of the proposed structure are certainly more interesting, and that would be a kind thing for the neighbors to consider that. Also, there's removal of street trees mentioned with replacement of 1. I'd like to see that upped. I would also suggest that the back areas with courtyards, that you could also do a favor to the neighbors by restoring some trees in those areas. Maybe you've considered that. Other than that, I think that the floor plans look very well crafted. I understand the sensibilities of people saying that the other senior housing is cheaper. I don't think that we're dealing with a solution for that tonight. So I applaud the applicants in that you're providing a service that we desperately really need right now. And that's my comment. I also appreciate the comment, I don't remember who made it, about, I think it was Denise, about anyone in the commercial spaces will have to park. And I would say I'd like to see the developer make a condition that they have to use those guest spaces inside, so they're not further impacting the street parking.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson, please.
I think you'd run out of spaces for guests if the employees were using the parking spaces. All right, so clearly there are a lot of areas of concern. The largest area of concern for me is the 23 Club, and if I did think that this project, by removing the parking lot, would eliminate potential on that half, then I would definitely vote to deny the application. But I think I feel satisfied, based on the previous application, that that can continue to be a viable business plan, and that these could go ahead as independent projects. I know that parking is a huge concern in the town, but I think that the senior housing is going to be an incredible benefit, and it is conforming under the existing parking regulations, so I'm in favor of going forward with the project. I do have concerns about the commercial development in the front and the parking for employees, and the fear that, a flower shop or other kinds of businesses that might fit into that space might not be viable in Brisbane, but we are zoned for mixed-use commercial, so it looks like we'll, that's a cost of going ahead with the project. I do think to address the parking, that we're going to have to take that as a separate initiative to get a parking permit program in place, especially on Visitation and San Bruno Avenue.
Okay, Commissioner Cunningham.
I would actually like to continue the public hearing to the next meeting to get the information that we've discussed out to the public, to get more input from more people. I like the project, but again, my only concern is the parking, and I'm not satisfied that we have addressed that in any way that I would feel happy to vote on anything tonight. So that's my recommendation.
Okay, I think this project has a lot of merits, and as far as the parking concern is, we already know that the city already has the parking problems, and I don't think this project we can make this project such a way that it's going to solve the problem, parking issues. It will not. It has to be addressed at the city level, and in order to do that, we have to have a separate session on that, but I don't think we should hold this project and don't allow this to go forward, because this has a lot of positive things to it, and parking is going to be a problem for any project we build in Brisbane. So I'm in favor of going ahead with this project at this time, and I will suggest that the parking be handled at a later time, and also some of the concerns that are brought up by the other commissioners tonight, we can incorporate that in our suggested language, that you should do this part of the conditions, so we can add into that conditions of approval, and parking will be a problem, and I don't think any project can go forward if you're going to help from on the parking issues. We cannot work with the parking at this time, and city has to do something, and I think it's a council level issue that has to be addressed by the council. And back in 2005-2006, we discussed in detail about the parking problems in the city. We recommended to the city council many times. So again, I'm in favor of this project, and I'd like to see who else wants to go ahead with this project with the added conditions that discussions we have, and based on that, Colleen, you had some concerns that you want to incorporate into that.
I would like to ask Commissioner Cunningham what questions you're hoping that we would have answered, because I'm not sure I recall from, we've discussed a lot of things. So if you would continue this, what other unresolved issues are you looking for resolution to?
I just want to discuss the parking in more detail. I'm very, very uncomfortable with the idea that, I mean, I'm looking at an aerial view now of the parking lot and the teen center and the 23 Club, and I'm just not comfortable making a decision right now, so I can't, because I have questions that have not really been adequately answered. I think there's questions that we can ask the city in the next couple of weeks and maybe get some more clarification from the city about, you know, what their thoughts are on moving parking somewhere else. I mean, it's a terrible issue. We've just ignored it for way too long. But yeah, I'm not, if you guys want to vote on it, I'm not going to.
Okay.
I would like to continue the public hearing, get some more information out to people. So, you know, if we're talking about putting a parking structure in the middle of a residential area, I think people might want to hear about that, even that thought process that's been brought up by the developer, the builder, you know, as a way of alleviating taking out an entire parking structure from another future development. I like the project, I just don't like the parking answer, and it's not sitting well with me.
So could we, as a compromise, agree to ask the questions of the city, keeping in mind that this is essentially, we seem to agree it's a good project, but parking is an issue, that we not delay this project significantly, but that we go back to the city and say, you have a teen center, it's going to be demolished. Do you have any thoughts on addressing parking? That should, seems like that could be expedited. This could be brought back to us for a vote.
The only, I think, concern we'd have is ultimately what's done with city excess properties, a city council decision, not a staff decision. They can certainly lay out all sorts of options, what might be done with excess city property, but you know, no one can rely on a staff suggestion. It's going to be the council determination. You know, if that was something you wanted to suggest along the lines of something that you want the council to consider, that would be something you should put forward either as a separate recommendation. It's not a requirement of this project. Nobody's proposing it as a condition of approval of this project. So if that's something that you want the council to consider independently, or you want to ask the question for the council, again, it's related, but it's not really tied to this application. So that would be another way of handling that.
Yeah, in my opinion also, there are two different separate things, you know, because the teen center, how can we relate this to this project? Because this project has to be on its own merit. And as far as the parking concerns, I think the issue is there, loud and clear, everybody knows, you know. So I don't know, by further discussion, what else we're going to explore. I really don't know.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
On a previous meeting of the Planning Commission, we requested that we agendize a discussion on parking, and has that made it on the schedule yet? Do we know when that will be?
I believe we had thought about putting that off until you had a full body, but if you want to accelerate that, you can certainly accelerate that.
True. I was like, yeah, we did have an answer on that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's your
call. Thank you for refreshing my memory. I'd forgotten.
I did too.
Okay. So once again, I'm thinking that I don't see we will be able to resolve the parking issue.
Well,
no matter how much we discuss, I don't think we will be able to resolve it.
May I?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I know you're really ready to do this. I don't see that there is a horrible issue waiting 2 weeks. We've got a lot of people in our audience tonight who wanted to speak, and you wanted to continue a public hearing recently that had nobody in it. So we've got a lot of people here who had a lot of opinions. I think just giving us another 2 weeks. I'm not asking for another 2 years. I know people in this town like to drag things on for years and years and years. I'm not one of them. But I want to think about this for another 2 weeks and give the public another opportunity to have their say, which might bring some really creative answers to the fore.
Mm-hmm.
So, you were prepared to continue a public hearing when there was nobody in the room. So I don't understand why it would be such an issue just for 2 weeks to continue the public hearing so other people can speak.
It's not that I have a personal interest in this project or anything like this. From my perspective, I don't see any outcome from extending this for another 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, because
I just asked for
the
2 weeks,
parking
the next
is a major issue, and I don't think we will be able to resolve that. But I will ask other commissioners, what's your idea of extending this another week or for the next meeting?
One meeting.
Yeah.
One meeting.
What about other commissioners? What do you think? You think
Well,
that we will be able to?
While I feel that the issue of public input is important, and it's important to have enough time to gather a sufficient amount of public information, public input to make a decision, I feel in this case the project is conforming on parking, so I don't feel that a lot of additional public testimony about the problems with parking we have is going to influence our decision about whether to move forward on this project or not. I do feel that we need to address parking, and I feel we need to do it in a different way.
Okay, what about you, Ms. McCann?
I don't have a problem with waiting 2 weeks, but I tend to agree with my other fellow commissioners that if we open this to another public hearing, we're going to hear similar complaints about the lack of parking, the problems on the street, and I'm remiss in trying to think of any kind of solution to it as well. I don't think we're going to be able to solve it on this one project. I do think it's viable, it's an impetus to say we have a significant problem and we need to grapple with it. So I'm okay with moving ahead, but I think the issue of the Planning Commission waiting to deal with parking until we have a full panel of commissioners, at last count I think that's slated for October, November. Is that still correct? And it could be later. So I'd almost like to see that moved up.
Yeah, I agree on moving that up.
Yeah, we don't have to wait for until the vacancy is filled. So if you can expedite that, maybe in next couple of meetings, if you can bring it up. So who wants to want to make a motion to continue?
Well, I'd make a motion to continue it just
Okay.
for 2 weeks. I'm
And
probably not going to get a second on this.
Who's anybody wants to second on that? No.
Well, before we go there, again, I'd ask Commissioner Cunningham, what do we anticipate we will learn? And I know you could say we have no idea. There could be creative solutions. But I think the bulk of people that showed up tonight are the interested neighbors who had significant things to say. And I'm not sure that we're going to have more. We're just going to be filling the room with people saying we have a significant problem.
It's 2 weeks. It's not 2 years. But if you guys are going to vote on it, I'm not going to. And respectfully, I like the project, but I'm not ready to vote on it. I want to think about it myself personally a little bit more, especially given some of the things that were brought up today. And we've put off projects for years trying to make decisions. I'm asking for 2 weeks. That's all.
Okay, why don't you made a motion? Anybody wants to second the motion to? No. So that's so next. So motion doesn't carry. We don't have second on that. So anybody else wants to make the motion to go ahead with this project?
I motion that we recommend to the City Council to approve the project of...
Through the chair, this is not a recommendation, it's an approval. It
Yeah.
would only go to the City Council on appeal.
I apologize. Very well then, I will recommend that the Planning Commission approve projects use permit UP 217, design permit DP 117 with the grading review of EX 317 for 32 through 50 San Bruno Avenue.
Okay, now a second.
Oh, you want me to second? I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, so moved.
Nay.
And nay, okay.
Thank you.
So we have 3 yea and 1 nay. Okay, then appeals process. Anyone may appeal this action of the Planning Commission to the City Council, except where specified otherwise. Appeal shall be filed with City Clerk not later than 15 calendar days following the Planning Commission's decision. An application form and fee is required to make a formal appeal. For additional information, please contact the City Clerk at 415-508-2110. Thank you very much. And next, we will go to the next item, which is again, okay. You already had the chance to speak before the council, so we are to continue with our public hearing, okay? Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the one that was removed from the consent calendar, the approval of resolution GPA-2-17, recommending City Council adoption of the draft Parkside at Brisbane Village Precise Plan as modified in Exhibit A to the resolution. And once again, this was at the request of Mr. Ray Miller and Anya Miller. And this is the first time in my 17 years that somebody, asked us to remove something from the consent calendar. So that's why I didn't pay attention. But all these years I've been on the Planning Commission, nobody has requested that. So anyhow, should we go forward with this? And again, sorry to put that behind item number 1. We have to wait through the whole session here. So. Okay, Mr. Ray Miller, come forward. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Commissioners. It was just following the rules and procedures of the Planning Commission. I have just a one-page statement I'd like to bring to your attention, which I think you all have. And attached to that is a map from the draft EIR for the Baylands relating to history of landfill.
Excuse me, Ray, could I have like 1 minute just to read this? Because I haven't seen it before.
Please. I was going to read it myself.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
So it would be in the record, and it just gives you a record for the same.
Yep, thank
It's
you.
all about environmental issues.
Thank you.
Okay, so statement reads that, in my view, the community would be better served with the following minor modifications to the Parkside and related general plan documents that are before the Planning Commission this evening. 2 important dimensions seem missing in the changes to the general plan. First, the existence and role of the city's open space plan in the Guadalupe Hills sections. And then 2, the existence and implications of sea level rise for the Parkside area. The Parkside area has some important environmental issues that are not adequately addressed by the precise plan. All 3 of them should be seriously studied, and a comprehensive mitigation plan needs to be in place before any site development approvals occur. First issue, nearly all of the Parkside area is unregulated fill. According to the map that you have in the Baylands EIR, most of the fill occurred in 1900 to 1915. Second point, some of the, and therefore fill needs to be investigated for its implications for development thereon. B, some of the Parkside area is in the FEMA floodplain. However, FEMA does not take into account sea level rise. How much and how fast sea level rise will occur is uncertain. However, so far, all the scientific models have underpredicted what has already happened. The latest models of climate scientists give 3 meters or 10 feet as possible increase in sea level in the 21st century, even if the Paris Accord is implemented by most countries. The location, third point, the location of the multi-unit housing, especially the furthest west site, is surrounded by warehouse operations that could create serious truck-caused air pollution. Ironically, this most vulnerable site is nearly adjacent to the same warehouse at which there was considerable public opposition to a proposal for a freight forwarding operation. The proximity of the school to potential small particle pollution was the concern. This proposed multi-unit project would have children in residence on a 24/7 basis. And I thought about how we can deal with this. And I've shared this with the planning director. It should be possible to move ahead with the zoning for the housing element while simultaneously including a statement in the general plan and the precise plan that requires a targeted environmental review and comprehensive mitigation plan before any development sites are approved. It just seems like the responsible thing to do. Besides, the state legislature might pass legislation that truncates or eliminates environmental analyses for housing projects unless they are already in place. So I'm not asking for a delay or derailing or anything, only that we add a couple of statements that makes it clear that probably should address these environmental issues comprehensively for the site before any development is approved.
Yeah. Also, you brought out the point that the state might preempt all of this. We don't need to do this. So it will be, yeah, I agree that if we put it in the general plan language there, this and precise plan, then we will have the way to handle this.
That's my suggestion. And
yeah.
I'll defer to the planning director because we talked about it.
Well, I think of the 3 points, and you know, more of the technical issues, and then we can talk about sort of the suggested conclusion. You know, the idea about the unregulated fill. I think we had a discussion at the last meeting about the liquefaction hazard map, and we outlined the requirements in the building code for what kind of site study is required for project sites that are subject to liquefaction, which is again on a site-specific review. So again, I'm not quite understanding what a comprehensive review of the sites in their collective whole would really help in terms of actual safety of a particular building that might be built pursuant to the plan. So I'm having a little disconnect between the suggestion for a comprehensive mitigation plan relative to liquefaction and fill related issues. The FEMA floodplain issue I think is well taken. Again, it's not limited to Parkside. That is truly, I think it's almost analogous to the parking discussion we were just having. It's you know, there are going to be much broader areas of Brisbane that are affected, and I think whatever city strategy for management, adaptive strategies to deal with floodplain should be incorporated into Parkside and any subsequent development. But I don't think it's necessarily unique to Parkside. These issues are going to be much broader than just the Parkside area. So I think again, there's a way to get language in there that ensures that Parkside contributes to and participates in whatever kind of citywide solutions to deal with the sea level rise issues comprehensively within the city. And then the issue of the air quality issues, and I think again they're well taken, and I appreciate Mr. Miller bringing those up. Again, I think typically, like when that freight forwarder came up, those developments, those industrial developments, will have the obligation to do the air quality studies of their projects to ensure that they're protective of health of surrounding land uses. So if residential is designated in Parkside, any subsequent industrial developments or truck-related uses, they'd be the ones obligated to analyze their use and the impacts of that operation. They're obligated to mitigate their own impacts, not necessarily of the receptor being required to mitigate the impacts of some unspecified future industrial user. So that's typically how it's done. The CEQA relates to the impacts of a project, which would be in this case a freight forwarder, whatever, truck heavy industrial use. They would be obligated to do their own impacts. But I think all these can be acknowledged as issues of concern and that the city should be aware of, both in the Parkside and the perhaps maybe some planning language we should look at in Crocker Park. And now if we want to create this new interface and some special language that makes that very clear. As to the suggestion about the environmental review, I have not had the opportunity to review this suggestion with the city attorney. And my only concern is that I think as those of you who are on the commission when the housing element was adopted, went through that process, the state requirements for the zoning that we're required to adopt are that the zoning districts have to allow for housing by right, which typically means no discretionary review by the planning commission and no CEQA review. So that's again why we're going through the plan process, is to enable the city's zoning regulations to comply with the requirements of the state housing law. So my concern is by putting a environmental review requirement and discretionary, which typically implies some sort of discretionary analysis, I'm not convinced that that will pass the muster of meeting our state obligations for the housing. But I would certainly discuss that with the city attorney. If you want to suggest that advisorily, subject to the approval of the city attorney, that's certainly your prerogative if you were inclined to do that. But it would be subject to the city attorney determining that that would be consistent with the requirements of our housing element and state housing law. So those are my comments.
This is related to number 3, right? You talked
Yes,
about it. Okay. I think we should get the advice from the city attorney, because this is going to be a problem once the new regulations come in. So we need to clarify this, and I personally like this idea to put this in the general and plan and precise plan. That way we have more control, but I don't know whether it can be done. But
the state's rewriting the rules right now, so.
Pardon me?
I said the state's rewriting the rules right now, so who knows what we're going to end up with.
Yeah, but the thing is, if we are ahead of the curve, then possibly we can be preempted because we already have in this general plan. So that's the idea, that we can, if we can move forward right now, that will help us. And I think there will be significant environmental issues with this, any project of this kind. And if we completely preempted, then it's going to be a problem, because these are significant issues. We cannot really ignore that, even though the state may say don't do it. So I don't know the other commissioners, but I think that's a good idea to get run it by the city attorney.
I see no harm.
No harm
running
at
it
all.
by.
Okay, Anya?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, who is there some sort of white elephant developer waiting to get this plan adopted so that they can come and apply for actual development? If there is none, then the whole thing is like a sales document for a potential developer. Of course, we'd like to have this kind of thing. I mean, I'm all for what you're trying to do here. Absolutely. We need the housing, we need mixed use, we need to revitalize, and even the affordable housing. Absolutely. But it looks to me like, it is a sales document, and as such, it should be truthful. And a developer, potential developer that you're selling this plan to, should know that it's a flood zone, that there may be liquefaction, and that there may be problems with air pollution from the commercial activities around that the existing activities you can't control. So it just, in fairness, to me, it just would make it more truthful. And as far as making it more truthful for our people, it's also all these pretty pictures showing as if the whole development was already built, how it would look if it were here now. And if you talk about 10 feet of added soil, what would the height be looking at from Community Park to the new height of the buildings? It just changes. And the people have been sold a bill of goods, looking at the place as if it were today. You're looking at future. There may be nothing for 5 years, 10 years. There has to be higher heights.
I think we addressed that in one of the recommendations we had.
Did you?
Yes, we did.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
What I suggested is that the time when the permit is issued, at that time you should look at what the sea level is.
Yeah, but the people don't know this, and somehow
but it was recommended.
You're approving a plan that doesn't really say that the true situation, what's going to be. Yeah. If it's built in 2 years, and nothing can probably happen before 2 years from now, they're going to have to. We have a San Mateo County sea level study. It's going to be implemented. We're going to have some things happen, and it might as well be known to our people that these buildings will be 10 feet higher from the present ground to start with, and all those sidewalks things and beautiful walkable things, they're not going to be.
Yeah, we addressed that.
Been shown in the pretty pictures.
We did address that, Anya.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
And the U.S. Geological Survey map is with that information.
Okay, I'm glad.
I made that
really
map come
bothered
forward.
me that, this is the pretty pictures. Really, the consultant did not take into account the reality. Okay.
Well, the pictures are as of now. What it's going to look if somebody builds it now.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
it's going to take a time.
I do have, since you are changing the general plan, I did read through some of the stuff and was amazed that none of you had caught some of these omissions. On your attachment D1 page dash 23 page, there's on the second paragraph a description of the public facilities and parks, and in the Parkside area, it used to be under Central Brisbane,